Today's video is sponsored by LG and Nvidia. Prior to the game's launch, we were told Outriders was to be a complete experience, with a fully voiced story campaign, and endgame loot grind that will keep us busy after that. We were also told this was not going to be a live service game. There would be no battle pass, no seasons, no quarterly updates. Instead, we would be getting a finished product to be enjoyed in its entirety from day one. Well, when Outriders officially released on April 1st, 2021, this was mostly true. There was a campaign that lasted roughly 20 to 30 hours, and endgame content in the form of repeatable expeditions we could run to farm for legendary gear. As much as it was a complete package, the game suffered from a few critical issues that really held it back. For one, it was riddled with bugs, from basic yet frustrating ones like getting caught on objects in the terrain, to more severe issues like skills not functioning properly. There were reports of players randomly having their entire inventory deleted, numerous problems with performance and game crashing, and multiplayer was plagued with disconnect and syncing issues. On top of that, the endgame, while there, was thought to be fairly lacking and quickly became repetitive. For all those reasons, Outriders launched with a fairly mixed reception, scoring a 73 out of 100 on both Open and Metacritic, with only 52% of critics recommending the game. Personally, I enjoyed my time with Outriders. I felt the combat, when things worked, was fairly solid, and I really liked the system of mods that let you mix and match perks from any weapon or armor, which in theory opened up a lot of options for build diversity. My ultimate takeaway at the time, though, was that as much as I enjoyed playing Outriders, I didn't think the game would be worth the full price of $60 for many people, especially considering how quickly things fall off at endgame. But in the months since Outriders release, there have been a few updates. The game's received several patches addressing the more egregious bugs and performance issues. More so though, just recently, Outriders got a fairly large free update adding more content and some major improvements to the end game loot grind. So how is Outriders looking today? Has the game improved enough since it launched? And should you play it in 2022? I'm here to answer all of those questions and more right after a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. Once again, today's video is being sponsored by LG and Nvidia, specifically for the LG Ultra Gear 34GP950G. This is their 34-inch curved ultra-wide monitor with a bunch of interesting specs and features designed for both work and gaming. I've been using this monitor for the past few months and have enjoyed my time with it. All of the extra screen real estate has been much appreciated for my work, and its gaming focus features are really nice as well. If you stay tuned for later in the video, I'll be going over more of the specifics and interesting details about its functionality, like high refresh rate, full G-Sync support, and the center display crosshair feature. In the meantime though, let's get back to talking Outriders. Before we dive into the current state of the game, I think we should take a brief look at everything that's happened between launch and today. Since release, Outriders has received a handful of patches every single month, targeting many of its major issues. These include crash fixes, performance improvements, bug resolution, character and inventory restoration, legendary drop rate increases, class buffs, mod buffs, set item fixes, multiplayer connectivity improvements. The list goes on and on. All of the patch notes alone could make for a super long video, though I won't be reading them line by line here. The main point is that they've been picking away at some of the biggest reported bug and performance problems that the game originally had. Now, I'll be honest, most of these issues I don't recall personally experiencing back when I played when the game came out. Of course, I realize that doesn't mean that there weren't any issues. Me not seeing a bug or not having crashes does not mean that other people weren't. And I'm not denying the existence of these problems solely on my anecdotal experience. But because I didn't run into these issues myself, it's hard for me to gauge how much or little all of these patches have made a difference. I don't know if the game is much better now than it was back then because I didn't experience this stuff myself, so I've got nothing to compare it to. But I would hope with the sheer number of patches that they've released that it's in a better spot currently, although a quick glance at some of the more recent negative reviews on Steam do point to some issues apparently still lingering. It's almost impossible for me to figure out how widespread this may be. All of this is to say they have pushed through tons of updates to address some of the game issues, but apparently some may still exist. I honestly have no idea and no way of verifying. because there's just things that I'm not seeing that other people clearly are. But let's put that stuff aside for the moment, because I really want to focus on the recent fairly large update to the game. It's called New Horizons. It released on November 16th, and with it came the removal of expedition timers, various improvements to gear farming, a brand new transmog system, 4 new expeditions, and a handful of quality of life changes, all of which were completely free. A totally free update. And this was really the catalyst for me revisiting the game in the first place. I was just interested to see how these changes would affect the end game, as that is primarily what they focus on. I did make a video entirely focused on this update a few weeks ago, but to summarize it quickly, here's what you should know. For starters, getting rid of the expedition timers is a massive deal. When Outriders first released, the endgame expeditions had the speed clear mechanic. Basically, your reward at the end of each run would be based on how fast you finished. Depending on your time, you would get a rating of unranked bronze, silver, or gold, with the higher ratings rewarding more and better gear. The result of this was that a fairly limited number of builds became viable for players looking to gear up. You really had to focus on speed clearing if you wanted the highest chance to get epic and legendary drops. This was especially tough for anyone like myself who enjoyed running these solo. There simply were not a lot of viable build choices. To make matters even worse though, my class, the Devastator, was considered the bottom of the barrel at the time. The handful of times that I actually tried to matchmake into a group, I was immediately booted, presumably because they thought I would drag their clear time down, which was probably true. Like, I was playing the inferior class at the time, so I probably would have made it so that they didn't get those gold clears, really. But now, with the current system, timers are gone by default. No matter how slow or how fast you clear an expedition, you have the same opportunity for getting epic and legendary drops. This not only takes the pressure off of when you're doing a run, but I think it also has made me a lot less concerned about trying like wackier builds. I'm more okay now with playing around with different mods and trying those new weapons that I get than I would have been in the past, because I no longer feel like there's only one good build and weapon combination to clear expeditions. I'm freed up to be a lot more creative and just playful with things, really. In addition to removing the timers, they've also equalized rewards, so expeditions that tend to take longer to clear will now give you more stuff. This change helps to eliminate the desire to only farm those fastest expeditions, since we're now given more resource and gear for completing those longer ones. And I think both of these changes have really brought a lot more variety into how I approach the endgame. I am more open to trying new playstyles, armor, weapons, and mods, and I'm also more willing to run a greater variety of expeditions than I would have been in the past, since I'm now rewarded for doing so. New Horizons also brings a handful of changes to the speed at which you acquire endgame loot. They've increased legendary drop rates by 100%. They also added an anti-duplication system, reducing the chance you'll get an item you already own, and the game's final mission, Eye of the Storm, now lets you pick one of 3 legendaries every time you finish it. These 3 changes greatly increase the speed at which you will fill out your collection. More legendaries are dropping more often, and they're less likely to be ones you already have. Along with these changes, Tiago, the legendary vendor in your camp, has gotten a few adjustments. He now offers a mystery legendary purchase if you're feeling lucky and want to gamble away your drop pod resources, or you can also spend those resources to re-roll his elite offers until some item that you actually want shows up. All of this results in Outriders having a much shorter legendary gear grind than they did originally. I guess depending on what you're looking for, this may be a positive or a negative. Personally, I love the changes. I enjoy playing Outriders, but you do get tired of doing the exact same things over and over again. Even though I get that that's part of a loot game, I'll touch on why it's more of an issue here in Outriders, and I think that making that gear grind shorter is actually better for the game and may have and has had me enjoying it more. Something else that came in this update that I love is the transmog system. This lets you change the visual appearance of any item you have to anything else that you've ever unlocked on your account. The best of all is that there are 0 restrictions, no resource cost, and no limitations. In fact, this system even works between the classes, so you could take this legendary Devastator set and apply that appearance through transmog onto your Trickster. This is probably one of the best and and least restrictive transmogs I've seen in any loot game ever. They've literally knocked this one out of the park. Like, this is, I think, the gold standard for how all transmog systems should be judged going forward. Kudos to Outriders. They really did a good job here. Now, everything so far has been systems and mechanics changes, but New Horizons also brought with it some new content in the form of 4 additional expeditions. There's Molten Depths, Marshall's Complex, City of Nomads, and the Wellspring. These expeditions unlock at challenge tiers 1, 4, 8, and 12 respectively, and they offer a few more locations to choose from when farming for gear, bringing the total number of expeditions to 19, including Eye of the Storm. All of these changes coming in a completely free update. And like I said, this is why I decided to revisit the game in the first place. Like, I liked Outriders well enough when it came out, but I felt the need to come back and see how the game felt with these changes and additions. So what I want to do now is take a look and recap kind of what the whole package of Outriders is. What does the game offer in terms of the content, the things to do, and the overall experience? And this will play into whether or not you might want to play the game. For starters, I want to talk about the campaign. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over the specific details in this video because really there's nothing new. It's the exact same campaign that there was at launch, with hopefully most of the bugs ironed out though. But don't let this fool you as to its importance. The campaign is likely to be a good 50% of your overall experience and possibly playtime as well. And that's the thing. Outriders is a linear story-driven game that also has Endgame for when you're finished. But for the reasons we'll get to in a minute, Endgame really shouldn't be considered your primary focus if you're going to be playing this game for the very first time. Even though that is what I'm focusing on in this video, I get that that's pretty confusing, but point is, the game's campaign lasts about 20 to 30 hours, plus or minus a few, depending on how quickly you march through the main story, or if you spend time exploring and doing all the side quests. I've seen the campaign last as little as 10 hours, or as much as 50, again, depending on your approach. Now, my recommendation would be to take it slow, explore, and enjoy the game. This really is a bulk of what Outriders has to offer. Rushing to hit max level and start that expedition grind, it just really doesn't make sense ultimately with how relatively shallow the experience is if you compare it to other loot games. You should probably take your time and enjoy the campaign. There is a fairly interesting sci-fi narrative to follow. There's some cool and interesting characters as well, and really some super awesome set pieces. Some of the environmental and enemy design in this game I think is phenomenal, especially some of the boss fights. Really cool stuff. I really liked it when I played it at launch, but this video isn't meant to be a review of that campaign because there are enough of those out there. Again, it hasn't changed since launch. You can go check out any early reviews. What I want to talk about is how the game looks today compared to launch, and all of those changes do pertain to the end game. But yes, I liked the campaign. I thought it was pretty cool. It took me, I think, 20 hours total. You could push upwards to 40 or 50 though if you really take your time, if you do all the side quests, if you do the exploration. It's up to you, of course, but I recommend savor the campaign because yeah, that's a good chunk of this game. Let's now talk about the end game though. Once you finish the main story, you're immediately brought to the Outriders camp and introduced to expeditions for the first time. These are entirely new locations, different from what you played through in the campaign, and this is where you'll be going to progress your character, farm legendary gear, and try out different builds. Now, as I mentioned, with the recent updates, there are now 18 different locations to choose from, or 19 if you include the final mission Eye of the Storm. These will rotate in and out of availability, so every time you go back to camp, there's a new combination of expeditions available. When you start out, you'll be limited to just a few options, and you will unlock more as you progress. Each expedition is modeled off of the various areas from the main game, but presented in a new fashion. Different kinds of biomes and areas like abandoned towns, ancient ruins, deep forest, and barren wastelands. These are structured like the rest of the game. They're fairly linear. The map design of this game is basically moving you from one combat arena to another with some transitional area in between, and then wrapping up with some sort sort of a boss fight. That is how the expeditions are structured. Layered on top of the expeditions is this system known as challenge tiers. These offer progressively harder content for better rewards. So you'll start at tier 1, which sets the enemy and loot levels to 31, and your goal is to clear the expedition, collect the loot. This in turn makes you stronger and lets you move on to challenge tier 2, which will further increase the enemy and loot levels, so on and so on. The entire endgame's progression revolves around moving up these challenge tiers, equipping gear, getting stronger, moving further up, all while also trying to acquire legendary gears and mods. And this gear is where things get really interesting. They offer wildly powerful enhancements to your abilities, really can change up how your character plays. And it's more than just increases in damage, although it is that too. So for example, currently I am running an anomaly-focused seismic shifter build for my Devastator. The skills that I'm using are Endless Mass, which encases a target in stone, inflicting bleed and pulling enemies in the area towards it before exploding, dealing damage and slowing them down. I've also got Earthquake, which releases a damage-dealing shockwave and interrupts targets, and Gravity Leap, where I Superman in the air, landing on targets, dealing massive damage and also interrupting them. To go along with this, I'm using the Marshall set, which has a 3-piece set bonus of sharing 40% anomaly damage to enemies caught in Endless Mass. And then there are my mods that will further alter my base skills. So I've got mods that will alter Endless Mass, increasing its radius by 25%, increasing damage enemies take by 33%, and inflicting vulnerability. My Earthquake mods add 1 extra charge before it goes on cooldown and increase its base damage. And my Gravity Leap mods also add an extra charge to this ability, increase its damage. They add a heal effect, and they double the anomaly damage targets hit by Gravity Leap receive. With this set and these mods, my current rotation in combat looks like this. I will cast Endless Mass on a target, which debuffs them, pulls in nearby enemies, and then with my Marshall set, 4 of those targets will now share 40% anomaly damage. I will then Gravity Leap onto that cluster of enemies, which deals damage, heals myself, and then doubles the damage that they take for the next few seconds. And then I'll do that a second time since I have 2 charges of Gravity Leap, and then I will Earthquake twice, dealing massive damage with all of these increased anomaly damage and doubling damage they have from the various debuffs that I applied before it. The end result is that things just explode. Everything vanishes on the screen. It's hilarious. And this is just one potential combination building off of a single Devastator gear set. I could use this same set with a different combination of skills, although I would still want Endless Mass because that's what this set revolves around, but I could change my other 2 supporting skills as well as make changes to my mods that will further enhance those skills. On top of that, weapons can help enhance this synergy as well. They do more than just shoot bullets. Weapons will come with various interesting mods as well. Currently, the weapons that I'm using are Damascus Offering. This is an LMG with the Claymore Turret mod, which make it so that my shots will damage up to 4 enemies with these anomaly blades altered by my anomaly damage. I'm also using this Anemoy weapon that has the Moaning Winds mods, which when I reload deals massive area damage to anyone within 8 meters. Both of these weapons, to which I've applied the Fortress mod, which came from another weapon, and this provides a stacking buff that increases my resistances while also granting me 30% bonus damage for 10 seconds. It's really kind of crazy all of the potential combinations and synergy that you can get between the gear that you're using, the mods, the weapons, the weapon mod and gear mods that are applied, and then the ones that you swap up to them, and then there's your skill tree, which will again further let you synergize. The mods are really interesting because besides going for the set bonuses, and besides hunting for gear that has certain attributes like increases to your health or anomaly or weapon damage, progression is also really focused around acquiring more mods. So mods are broken up into 3 different tiers. These are sorted by their power essentially, and the tier 3 mods, the best of the best, are solely found on legendary armor and weapons. So you'll be hunting for these items not only to equip them, but also because when you dismantle them, you get their mods stored in your crafting station, and then you can apply those to any other piece of gear. And this is what really opens up so much potential in combinations. So as a basic recap, the endgame in Outriders has you running through expeditions, progressing through its various increasing tiers, acquiring higher level gear, legendary weapons and armor, and then unlocking mods that can then be mixed and matched as you please. On its face, the endgame system, the progression, the loot acquisition, and the potential for combinations and build variety, like, Outriders offers a really intriguing level of systems and like the way you engage with endgame. However, when it all plays out, the truth is Outriders Endgame gets repetitive quite a bit quicker than most other loot games. I think the biggest issue is simply lack of variety. Even with those 4 new expeditions that were added in New Horizon, putting the game at 18 locations that you're running over and over again for resources and gear, I think that very well could be enough had there been any sort of variety within the expeditions themselves. Like, yes, there are 18 different locations, but they are completely static. Not only the layout of the locations and the way you progress them and the timings, but also the enemies themselves. And I think this is really one of the biggest factors that leads to Outriders going stale much quicker than many other loot games in my experience. There's simply zero meaningful mixing up of the enemies you fight. It'd be fine if the locations were static, if the enemies offered some variety. However, every run is exactly the same as the last, down to the number of enemies spawning from the exact same locations at the exact same timing. Run after run, it really gets to the point where you know precisely what to expect every time you go through an expedition if you do them enough. I think a simple fix would just simply be mix it up a bit. I understand if they don't want to, throw monsters into the human focus levels because each of these expeditions do have some narrative and story behind them, but I think even adding more enemy modifiers or just changing up the types of enemies that spawn within the same families could go a long way. The worst part of all, though, is that it seems once you reach the top tier of T15 and can complete that final mission, Eye of the Storm, that is going to be the only thing you'll want to farm going forward. It has the highest legendary drop rate, and it gives a guaranteed bonus legendary, which you can now pick one of 3 options as part of that New Horizon update, which really helps you quickly fill in any missing pieces. As a result, I simply see no reason to run any of the other 18 expeditions. They don't have a guaranteed legendary drop, and they have lower odds of legendaries from the pod itself, while only giving slightly more resources as a reward. But I don't really feel the need to amass any more drop pod resources since I have a full set of gear that I'm happy with and everything's level 50. Functionally, what this means is that once I hit tier 15 and could farm Eye of the Storm, I lost any desire to do those 18 other expeditions. That really further limits the variety, like I'm running the same thing over and over again. Now, I do know if I were to truly fully min-max that I am supposed to be farming purple gear with this ideal stat allocation and secondary mods for my particular build, because you only need 3 pieces of a set to get the bonus. So me having all of the pieces doesn't really benefit me. I should be farming for purple stuff. But since I can clear tier 15, Eye of the Storm, the hardest content in the game, solo, with relative ease, in my mind, there's zero reason or in-game motivation to farm for those slightly better stats. I just don't need them. There's nothing to do with it other than to make the content that is already easy for me to solo slightly easier. What doesn't help matters is that Eye of the Storm is probably one of the most boring, straightforward expeditions. It is a single room with 3 zones to capture and a single boss to fight. Compared to all of the other expeditions, it is incredibly simple and boring. So this really has gotten me to the point where all I have left to do is farm mods to complete my collection, but there's really not much of a reason to. I would rather just start up a new character. Really, I guess the ultimate point is once you hit tier 15 and can do Eye of the Storm, there's like nothing left for you to really do. There's no reason and no in-game motivation. Now that said, I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Myself and apparently a lot of other people really like this game. Although Outriders does still have a mixed overall score, recent Steam reviews, which are classified as anything posted in the past 30 days, are currently very positive. And it's not a small number of reviews either, clocking in at around 3,000 at the moment, which is quite a few to be posted nearly 9 months after the game launched. And I think it's for good reason too. For a not a live service game, as they call this, there have been enough patches and improvements to Outriders that I think are really making steps in a great direction and put the game in a much better spot than it was originally. And you know, funny enough, I've enjoyed my revisit so much that I almost wish Outriders was a live service game. Like, I wish there was more of it. I wish there was more variety of content and more interesting variation on that content to engage in post the campaign. The New Horizons update is nice, especially considering it's free, but really, I think it only gave me an extra 10 or so hours before I hit that wall of repetition again, which is fine, yeah, because again, it is free, but part of me would definitely love to see this game at a larger scale. Although I will say, having just started leveling a new character does make me feel like I could get a second go around, honestly. I made a Trickster, and it's been different enough from my Devastator that I wouldn't mind playing through the campaign once again and doing that expedition grind for a second time, just to see what sort of builds, what sort of legendary gear sets they are, and the different mods for the Trickster, and how that would change up my playstyle, how it mixes things up. Okay, so we have covered a lot of ground here. There was a lot to talk about, and before we wrap things up with my final thoughts on the game and whether or not you should play it, let's get some more information about the sponsor of today's video. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be taking a closer look at some of the major features and benefits of the LG Ultra Gear 34GP950G. The first two features being NVIDIA's high refresh and LG's crosshair technology, which both offer some nice benefits for gaming. LG's crosshair feature helps to improve accuracy with center display crosshairs, enhancing vision and providing pro-level precision with increased accuracy in FPS games, while NVIDIA G-Sync display, rigorously tested for the highest standards, offers ultra smooth gameplay and fast reaction time with the highest refresh rates from 144 Hz to as high as 180 Hz. Beyond helping with game performance, the monitor has some nifty cosmetic and visual features. Advanced G-Sync Ultimate supports the DCI P3 color gamut for more realistic color reproduction with smoother grades. This helps to bring games, video, and photos to life with a wide color gamut support. And then the sphere lighting gives the monitor some next level ambiance. There are 6 different color settings that could create gaming atmosphere tailored to your mood. These options include white daylight, white neutral, magenta, red, nature green, and sky blue, any of which can be adjusted on the fly. To go along with this, it has sound sync mode, where the monitor lights up according to dynamic in-game sounds. Those are just a few of the cool features of the LG Ultra Gear 34GP950G. If you're interested in learning more and checking out the monitor yourself, go ahead and use the link in the video description below. Okay, now it is time to answer the big question of should you play Outriders in 2022? I would say that I really want to recommend Outriders, and I do, but with one major caveat. I need you to realize that this is a loot game with a definitive end, and it comes about fairly quickly if you compare it to many other titles in the same genre. In fact, I almost think it's best to consider Outriders as something different. It's not trying to be like Destiny or Warframe or Division. It is clearly designed on a much smaller scale and to be a much smaller experience. While I have enjoyed the game quite a bit, I do feel like I'm pretty much done after 60 or so hours. Or rather, I feel like I've seen enough and gotten enough gear that I'm satisfied with putting it away for now. I'll happily come back when the next major update comes out, and I do hope that it includes something substantial. We do know that they have plans for potentially releasing paid expansions that are supposed to be at a larger scale, and I would really love to see what they do with the current groundwork, and where at this point I think Outriders is in a fairly good position. So just realize that if you buy Outriders, it may not last as long as other loot-based games, but keep in mind that it was never really trying to. I come away pretty satisfied with my overall experience, the gameplay, the campaign, the loot, and the mod system, and how that mixes things up and makes for some pretty engaging content, I feel. I think it's all solid, and I had fun, and I feel like I got my money's worth. I am a little bit surprised that the game hasn't gone on some sort of a discount yet. I guess I'll assume that it is selling well enough they feel they don't need to yet, but it may very well happen in the future, and if you can get it on sale, I think it's totally worth it. Oh, and also, this is on Game Pass, which continues to be insane dollar to entertainment. So yeah, it may not be a perfect game, it may not last as long as some other loot-based games, but I think Outriders at this point is a pretty solid game, and if you can get it reasonably priced, I suggest checking it out. And with that, we wrap up today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Hopefully it helped you decide whether or not you want to play Outriders in 2022. As always, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.